Edu-Magicians, welcome to the Edu-Magic Podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of Edu-Magic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Lance Key, co-host of Get Inspired and Innovate, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey Edu-Magicians, it's Sam, and before we start into this episode, I want to share with you about an amazing resource. It's called the Educator Candidate Member Portal. AAEE provides you with resources such as virtual job fairs, a job board, interview tips and prep, resume building, webinars. You can even get a copy of the Job Search Handbook digitally. So head on over to aaee.org and create your free Educator Candidate Member account today. Friends, one more thing before we get started. This episode is brought to you by my new course, Digital Portfolios from Scratch to Interview Ready. Head on over to sfessich.com/courses for more information about this self-paced, hands-on virtual workshop. Hello, Edu-Magicians, and welcome back to another episode of the Edu-Magic Podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today I have with me Kerry Graham. Now, Kerry reached out to me over on email a couple of weeks ago, sharing about her insights on setting boundaries as a new teacher and how important it is. And I was like, you know what? We need to get you on the show and sharing about this information. So, Kerry, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm happy to have you on. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your teaching story before we jump into the importance of setting boundaries?
Absolutely. I am a high school English teacher in Baltimore City. This is my 10th year teaching. In that time, I've taught at 3 schools, and I've taught 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, mostly 10th grade. I'm currently teaching 11th. And most of the time, I love my job.
We were just talking before we hit record how stressful online teaching can be. So yes, you're both feeling that there. But whenever you emailed me, Kerry, what really intrigued me was the importance that you set early in your career as setting these boundaries. So let's talk about the why first. Why is it important for future educators to know how to plan and set boundaries, and what boundaries are they setting without feeling guilty?
I mean, this is going to sound so basic and ridiculous, but we're people. And I say this to my lovelies. That's what I call my students, my lovelies. On the first day of school, I say to them, like, I recognize that you are more than a high school student. Like, I recognize that you are a whole person with a whole identity, and that school could very well be a very small part of who you are and what your interests are. And that same logic applies to educators. So I am an educator who defines myself by my job. Like, my job is a very integral part of who I am. And there are a gazillion other aspects of my life and what it means to be Kerry Graham. And if I allow teaching and some of the nonsense that goes along with teaching, if I allow that to consume me, not only does it make me lose those other parts of myself, it makes me burn out and more importantly, I think, feel bitter and resentful toward the profession. And that's just too much negative energy to be in a job that just requires so much energy and effort. Like, you just want to be in a positive and healthy space to be able to function, to thrive, let alone function.
When you talk about burnout, can you describe that a little bit more?
I think burnout is basically like a combination of dread and apathy. Like, I do not want to do X thing or responsibility or task. That could be one of it. Just like, I cannot imagine the energy it will take to do this. I would so much rather be doing blah, blah, blah. So there's the dread. And then also just like, I don't even care. I don't care if it gets done. I don't care how it gets done. I don't care what people think of the job that is getting done or not. I don't care what the consequences are. And I think it is very easy for teachers to be burnt out. It's been a long time since I've had a job besides teaching. So I'm not trying to say like other professions don't also experience this. But as a
Right.
teacher for the last decade, I know that there are always going to be requests for our time. We are going to be voluntold things that we have to do or that we should do. There will be things that are assigned to us that just honestly shouldn't be asked of us, but it's all of a sudden a requirement. And that's all on top of the actual task of lesson planning and teaching and grading. Like everything I just said had nothing to do
Right.
with the actual class time. And so I think
Right,
burnout is
right.
just feeling like there's way too much that's being expected and there's no way it can all get done.
So how can we work to avoid burnout? How can we avoid this burnout? Well, what are some strategies we can start to take? And I know one of them that you're going to share is setting boundaries and being protective of your time. So let's jump into that. And in the email that you had written to me, you had shared that, I practice these tips, I practice these strategies, and I'm very mindful of my own time. So would you mind sharing a little more about that?
Yes, I love talking about not doing work. So, I mean, to my earlier point and to answer your question about how to avoid burnout, I think when you have too much of anything, you get tired of it or it loses its allure or it just becomes uninteresting or overwhelming. And so to recognize the balance of who we are as humans, I don't like the phrase work-life balance.
I don't think there is such a thing as balance. I think it's a unicorn.
Right. So maybe that's part of it too. And so I think just the idea of allowing yourself to honor your humanity. I mean, you are not this job. And yes, teachers take pride in talking about how much we give of ourselves and how much we do. But I mean, I feel like in a way that can turn us into martyrs. I feel like in a way it can turn us into masochists. And we aren't just teachers. Like we have however many other roles of people in our lives and however many interests and passions. And I think to the point about making or setting boundaries is just recognizing like there is a finite amount of time and how much time are we willing to devote to the different parts of our life.
And how do we get started setting those boundaries? Because it's very easy to say, can we have a volunteer for this? Yes, I'll do it. Who can lead that committee? Oh, pick me, pick me. So how can we start to set those boundaries, even as student teachers during our college career, that can help lead into saying no with intention and gracefully and respectfully? So although we really, really, really want to say yes, we need to say no to some things to protect our time. So what are some tips that you have for us to get started when we talk about setting up our boundaries and protecting our time?
I would say, so you had just said we really want to say yes. I would take a moment to reflect on why we want to say yes. Like, what is the rationale? Is it because this is going to look good on my resume? Is it because this is going to give me opportunities for X, Y, and Z? Or is it because it's going to make me happy? I mean, maybe having it on your resume will make you happy, but if you keep on like thinking, okay, so why that, and just sort of like keep peeling layer by layer into the metacognition of why you're saying yes, and if at the end of it, the yes is more because it's an obligation versus a desire, then the answer should be no. Because, like I was just saying, our job, like our base description as teachers, lesson plan, deliver lesson, grade. And like obviously we do way more than that. But I mean, if those things are going to suffer, like that should be the obligation that is the most foundational at getting met. And then beyond that, like, yeah, of course, being a team player and building relationships with students through whatever committee or club. But if it's always because, oh, well, I feel like I
Yes.
should do this, as opposed to, this makes me happy and this is a way I want to be spending my life,
Yes.
because that's what it turns out to be. So I think just really being honest about the intention.
I also like to think about Amy Porterfield shares in her podcast, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So thinking about that as another framework to think through, why am I saying yes? And I see you're nodding your head on that. Do you want to share any more about that?
Well, I mean, because it could relate to you as a person. So if I'm saying yes, I'm going to be class advisor, which takes a gazillion hours, then okay, like maybe, and that's important because maybe this class, like, you know, they really have my heart and it's important to me to be a part of their experiences and all of that. That's completely valid. And that also means, you know, you're going to be there for prom and graduation and setting up all those things. You're going to be there for all those committees. So what aren't you doing, either
Exactly.
personally or professionally? Because you're making a choice professionally, there's only so
Mhm.
much that you can do. And also, there are other people who also want to be saying yes. And so, at a point, even if you keep saying yes, eventually they might be like, you know what, Kerry, like, please sit down. You have been on too many committees. This has never happened to me and will never happen. But as
I
an
like that.
example,
That's funny. When I also like to think about, whenever I say yes to something, is it like, if it's like in 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now, I'll think to myself, is this something I'm going to want to be doing in 3 weeks? Is this an opportunity I'm going to want to do? Or will I be like, I got to do this thing? Like, think about, like, how is your future self
right.
going to feel? Are they going to thank you? Or are they going to say,
Exactly. And that's about the dread I was saying earlier when you asked about burnout. I mean, yeah, like in the moment, if you're like, yeah, this is exciting because it'll look good or because it might be fun. But yeah, like just think practically, like, okay, but they're calling for really nice weather and I would really like to be outside doing something fun instead of being at this PTA meeting at 7 o'clock on a Thursday. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back for our student teachers, and we're setting up our boundaries. How can we do that in a respectful, polite way? If somebody asks us to come in early, to stay late, how do we set these boundaries respectfully for our time and respecting our cooperating teacher or our mentor teacher, along with the district in which we are guests in?
Without maybe necessarily ask. So if someone makes a request of
Mm-hmm.
us, any of the people who you just mentioned, and if it's not blatantly obvious, like why it is so important that a thing get done at that time, I think it's okay to be like, well, you know what? I can't actually come in an hour early, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to meet with you during my planning period about that.
Right.
So, I mean, there are circumstances when, you know, you just have to go at whatever
Mm-hmm.
time, before, after, on a weekend, blah, blah, blah. But like I said, those are very specific instances, and
Right.
it's like obvious that that is the only time this thing can get done. But if it's just because other people are used to having before school meetings and that's just what they've done, but it's just not on your radar for how you can function, it's
Mm-hmm.
not unreasonable to be like, actually, no, I can't do that. But,
Yeah.
and then to give an alternative. I don't think it's always required to give a reason if it's something that's
Mm-hmm.
out of the bounds of the traditional workday. I mean, if you know that you're being called to go to a meeting during a planning period, you can't be like, that's not going to work for me. Like, that's not okay. But if it's like, hey, there's a thing happening at 6 p.m. and we would like you to be there, if it's not going to work, you can be like, no, I'm sorry, but you know, we can, or even like we can talk
Mm-hmm.
about it on the phone, but I'm not going to be able to come into the building. I think having an option is completely acceptable. But like I said, I don't think we need to set ourselves up to give reasons, because then we'll always be thinking, oh, my reason's not good enough. When yes, it is. It is good enough.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a really important truth for student teachers, new teachers to know. There's always going to be more that you can do. but you don't have to do it unless it's like imperative, mandated that you must do this one thing. You can take a break, take a breather, because you need to invest in yourself. Kerry, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by on the podcast. Do you have any other tips or strategies for our new and future teachers when it comes to setting boundaries or protecting your time, or anything about burnout, or anything that we have discussed today?
I will say, I think just given like the ease that technology gives us to contact each other, like just because someone can email you at whatever hour of the day or can text you or can call you, that doesn't mean they need a response. And quite frankly, I don't care who they are. I mean,
Yes.
if this was like 50 years ago, you would need to wait until I was in the school building to talk to you. And if it was that big an emergency, I guess you would have driven to my house and found me. You know what I mean? And so if you get an email from 7 p.m. at 7
Right.
p.m. from your department head, oh, well, you'll read it at 9 o'clock or you'll respond to it at 9 o'clock the next morning. And so I think that seems like a small thing, like, oh, I'm just going to check my email and write back. But no, because then it completely shifts your mindset from whatever else you were doing and whoever else you were outside of your teacher role in that moment to now you're back in the teacher zone, and that'll chip away real quick at your like morale toward your job and lead to burnout.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so interesting that you had mentioned that. That just came up in a conversation with Brent Coley and I. He was sharing about, he calls it feeding the stray cat. If you answer that email at 8 o'clock at night from an administrator, a parent, a colleague, you just fed the stray cat. They're going to come back and they're going to expect it. They're going to expect a reply next time you respond back to them at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. So just set those boundaries to help yourself and be clear and upfront with the people around you. Like I tell my students, if you're going to send me a message like after 7 p.m., you can send it. I have my notifications turned off. You know, if you send me something at 1 a.m., it's not going to wake me up. But you will get a response like at 6 or 7 a.m. when I wake back up and when I'm responding to those messages. Or like if you send me a message and I will reply back to you in 24 hours. Do not send me multiple emails about the same thing. I will reply to you in 24 hours, on weekends 48, because, you know, I have a life outside. But like thinking about like just being clear with your boundaries and your expectations, I think that helps everybody. And it really helps you, the teacher, too.
Yeah, I had actually recently listened to that episode and I forgot the phrase, the feeding the stray cat, although I love it.
That's so funny.
I know, it's so funny. But when you were asking me the question earlier about, you know, the district or your mentor teacher or whoever like asking you to do something before or outside or after school hours, I was thinking that same thing, that if you are always saying yes, like, yes, I'm available at whatever hour or time you expect me to do a thing, then that just becomes the expectation, whether it's reasonable or not. And so after that, breaking it just seems so much harder because I don't feel like it. Seems like you're not allowed to say that. Like you can't tell someone you don't feel like doing something. They're your boss or they're your colleague. But if from the jump you're just like, yeah, that's not how I do things. I mean, say it as politely as possible, but you know, set the persona of this is who you are and this is when things are available. Then it just becomes the operation. And there are no kitties, even though I love cats.
Kerry, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. It's been really refreshing to give us, you know, permission to say no to things, permission to protect your time, and that it's okay to not work on weekends. It is okay, my friends. Thank you so much for sharing those ideas and those truths with us today. Kerry, would you mind sharing where my listeners can connect with you?
On social media, I'm at Ms. Kerry Graham.
Perfect. Awesome. And I'll put that in the show notes for us. All right, friends, we talked about the importance of setting those boundaries, how to be protective of our time, and being okay with saying no respectfully and politely, and, you know, how to get started with setting those boundaries early in our career. Remember, friends, you have the edgy magic within you.
And there you have it, Edu-Magicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.